From the mists of the 6th century BC emerged the Helvetii, Celtic-speaking peoples who would establish one of Iron Age Europe's most sophisticated tribal confederations across what is now western Switzerland. Archaeological excavations at sites like Bern Enge and Yverdon reveal organized settlements featuring rectangular timber-framed houses arranged in planned clusters, demonstrating both practical adaptation to Alpine climate and cultural continuity with broader Celtic building traditions across temperate Europe. Storage pits containing carbonized grain indicate agricultural surplus production, while workshops identified through iron slag concentrations and bronze-working debris point to specialized craft production beyond mere subsistence. The Latin cultural horizon, emerging around 450 BC and continuing until Roman conquest, provides the richest archaeological evidence for understanding Helvetii society. Named after the type site on Lake Neuchâtel, this cultural complex represents mature Celtic civilization's Alpine expression. Distinctive Latin artifacts recovered from Helvetii territory include elaborately decorated bronze torques featuring intricate curvilinear designs, iron swords with anthropomorphic hilts, and ceramic vessels displaying characteristic geometric patterns executed in red and black slip. Particularly significant are fibulae, bronze brooches fastening clothing, which exhibit regional variations, helping archaeologists trace cultural boundaries and trade relationships. The fortified settlements known as oppida represent perhaps the most impressive archaeological legacy of Helvetii territorial organization. These hilltop strongholds, constructed using the Murus Gallicus technique described by Caesar, alternating layers of stone, timber, and earth reinforced with iron nails, commanded strategic positions throughout their territory. The oppidum at Montville overlooking Lake Marat exemplifies this defensive architecture, its massive stone foundations still visible today. Archaeological investigation reveals these fortifications enclosed not merely refuge sites, but functioning urban centers containing residential quarters, craft workshops, and storage facilities. Within these oppida, archaeologists have uncovered specialized production areas including iron smelting furnaces, bronze casting workshops, and pottery kilns. The scale of production suggested by debris accumulations indicates manufacture beyond local needs, pointing to trade networks extending across the Alps into Mediterranean markets. Glass beads of Mediterranean origin, amber from Baltic sources, and coral from southern waters found in Helvetii sites confirm participation in long-distance exchange systems connecting their Alpine homeland to broader European commercial networks. The linguistic evidence for Helvetii identity presents complex pictures requiring careful analysis of fragmentary inscriptions and personal names preserved in classical sources. The tribal name itself derives from the Gaulish root Helvetios, likely meaning those who possess much land, or the wealthy ones, suggesting territorial control and resource abundance formed core aspects of group identity from an early period. This was no ordinary Celtic tribe. The Helvetii were destined to challenge Rome itself. The geographic extent of Helvetii territory encompassed approximately 11,000 square kilometers of prime real estate in what is now western Switzerland, stretching from Lake Geneva shores in the southwest to the Rhine River in the northeast. This region, bounded by the Jura Mountains to the northwest and the Alps to the southeast, formed a natural geographical unit with distinct ecological zones supporting diverse economic activities. The Swiss plateau, lying between 400 and 600 meters above sea level, provided extensive fertile agricultural land ideally suited to Celtic farming practices. Archaeological evidence demonstrates intensive cultivation of emmer wheat, barley, and legumes supplemented by cattle, pig, and sheep husbandry. Control of Alpine passes represented perhaps the most strategically valuable aspect of Helvetii territorial position. The Great St. Bernard Pass, connecting their homeland to the Rhone Valley and ultimately Mediterranean markets, generated substantial revenue through tolls and trade facilitation. Similarly, the Simplon Pass provided access to Italian markets, while northern routes through the Jura connected to Rhine Valley trade networks. This geographic position as gatekeepers to trans-Alpine commerce undoubtedly contributed to the wealth and political influence that classical sources attribute to Helvetii leadership. Social organization within Helvetii society reflected patterns common throughout the Celtic world, characterized by hierarchical structures based on warrior status, wealth accumulation, and kinship relationships. Archaeological evidence from burial practices provides the clearest window into these social distinctions, revealing marked differences in grave goods and burial treatment corresponding to social rank and gender roles. Elite burials from the Hallstatt and early Latin periods demonstrate emergence of a warrior aristocracy with access to luxury goods and specialized weapons. The burial at Grechwil, dating to around 580 BC, contained a remarkable bronze hydria of probable Greek manufacture alongside local Celtic weapons and ornaments. Warrior burials typically include iron spears, swords, and shields, often deliberately damaged or killed before deposition, a practice reflecting Celtic beliefs about the afterlife and the need to accompany the deceased with functional equipment in death. The quality of metalwork in these weapons, particularly pattern-welded sword blades found in higher status burials, demonstrates sophisticated technological knowledge and considerable investment in martial equipment. Female elite burials reveal parallel status hierarchies expressed through different material symbols. High-status women were interred with elaborate jewelry, including gold torques, bronze bracelets, and amber beads, alongside specialized tools like bronze mirrors and cosmetic implements. The complex political landscape that emerged among the Helvetii by the 3rd century BC represented one of the most sophisticated tribal confederations in Celtic Europe. Rather than operating as a single unified entity, the Helvetii comprised 4 distinct tribal groups: the Helvetii proper, who gave their name to the entire confederation, the Tigurini, the Latobrigi, and the Rauraci. Each maintained distinct territorial boundaries, leadership structures, and cultural practices while participating in broader Confederate institutions coordinating military campaigns, trade policies, and diplomatic relations with neighboring peoples. The Helvetii proper controlled the central Swiss plateau portion, encompassing fertile lands around modern Bern and extending southward toward Alpine foothills. The Tigurini occupied northeastern territories, controlling approaches to the Rhine and maintaining the Confederation's most important frontier with Germanic tribes. Their name, derived from the Celtic word for spear or javelin, reflects their reputation as fierce warriors who bore primary responsibility for defending Confederate territory against Swabi incursions. The Latobrigi controlled southwestern regions around Lake Geneva, managing the Confederation's most lucrative trade connections with Mediterranean markets through the Rhone Valley. Their territory encompassed the crucial Great St. Bernard Pass, generating substantial revenues through tolls levied on merchant caravans crossing between Gallic and Italian territories. The Rauraci occupied northernmost territories along the Rhine Bend, controlling river crossings and managing relationships with Germanic peoples across the frontier. The Confederate political system operated through complex hierarchies of tribal councils, addressing different governance and decision-making levels. At the local level, individual settlements maintained village councils comprising household heads who addressed resource allocation, dispute resolution, and seasonal agricultural coordination matters. These local councils selected representatives to participate in tribal assemblies, meeting at designated sacred sites during seasonal festivals to address broader political and military concerns. Each of the 4 tribes maintained its own primary assembly, typically convening at fortified oppida serving as political and religious centers. The Confederate Assembly, representing the highest political organization level, convened annually at rotating sacred sites throughout Helvetii territory, addressing matters affecting the entire Confederation, including military campaigns against external enemies, diplomatic relations with neighboring tribes, and coordination of long-distance trade policies. The stage was set for one of ancient history's most dramatic migrations and an inevitable collision with Rome. The economic foundations supporting Helvetii political complexity rested on sophisticated agricultural systems, specialized craft production, and extensive trade networks connecting their Alpine homeland to markets throughout Europe. Agricultural production centered on mixed farming systems, combining cereal cultivation with animal husbandry, optimized for diverse ecological zones within their territory. The fertile loess soils of the Swiss plateau supported intensive cultivation of emmer wheat, barley, and oats, while hillside terraces accommodated specialized crops, including flax for textile production and various legumes restoring soil fertility. Animal husbandry played equally important roles in Helvetii economic systems, with cattle serving as primary wealth and social status indicators. Large herds grazed on alpine pastures during summer months, managed through transhumance systems moving animals between lowland winter quarters and high-altitude summer grazing areas. This pastoral economy required sophisticated coordination between different tribal groups and seasonal agreements regarding grazing rights and movement corridors. Ironwork represented the most technologically advanced aspect of Helvetii craft production, building on centuries of metallurgical expertise that had made Celtic smiths renowned throughout Europe. Iron ore deposits in the Jura Mountains provided raw materials for extensive smelting operations, while forests supplied charcoal fuel necessary for high-temperature furnaces. Control of transalpine trade routes provided the economic foundation for Helvetii political power and cultural development. Their territory encompassed several crucial mountain passes connecting northern European markets with Mediterranean commercial centers, generating substantial revenues through tolls, escort services, and direct participation in long-distance commerce. The Great St. Bernard Pass alone handled significant volumes of trade between Roman territories and Celtic regions, while the Simplon Pass provided alternative routes the Helvetii could control or block according to political circumstances. Trade goods passing through Helvetii territory included Mediterranean wine, olive oil, and luxury manufactures moving northward, while return cargoes featured northern European products like amber, furs, metals, and slaves. Religious practices among the Helvetii followed patterns common throughout the Celtic world, while incorporating distinctive local elements reflecting their particular geographic and cultural circumstances. Druidical traditions provided institutional frameworks for religious activities, legal proceedings, and educational systems, maintaining cultural continuity across the Confederation's diverse tribal components. Druids served as priests, judges, teachers, and advisors to political leaders, wielding significant influence over all aspects of Helvetii society. Sacred groves located throughout Helvetii territory served as primary religious centers where major ceremonies and festivals occurred according to seasonal calendars, coordinating agricultural activities with spiritual observances. The sacred grove at the Rhine's source held particular significance for the entire Confederation, serving as the primary site for Confederate assemblies and major religious festivals. This location, where the great river emerged from Alpine glaciers, embodied the spiritual connection between the Helvetii and their mountain homeland. Annual gatherings at this site included religious ceremonies, renewing tribal alliances, judicial proceedings resolving intertribal disputes, and educational activities where Druids transmitted oral traditions to new generations. Ritual deposits in lakes throughout Helvetii territory provide archaeological evidence for religious practices involving water-based ceremonies and votive offerings. The military organization of the Helvetii reflected their position as one of Celtic Europe's most formidable fighting forces, combining traditional Celtic warrior culture with innovations adapted to their particular strategic circumstances. Elite warrior bands formed the core of Helvetii military strength, comprising professional fighters, maintaining constant readiness for warfare, and serving as the backbone of larger tribal levies during major campaigns. These warriors underwent extensive training from childhood, developing skills in weapons handling, horsemanship, and tactical coordination that made Celtic armies feared throughout Europe. Young warriors proved themselves through participation in raids against neighboring peoples, cattle-rustling expeditions, and single combat challenges demonstrating individual prowess. The distinctive Celtic warfare tactics employed by Helvetii forces emphasized mobility, psychological intimidation, and coordinated charges that could break enemy formations through sheer ferocity. Warriors advanced into battle accompanied by horn-blowing and war cries designed to demoralize opponents while building their own battle fury. The initial charge aimed to achieve decisive results through overwhelming force, but Helvetii forces also demonstrated tactical flexibility in adapting to different combat situations and terrain conditions. Tribal levies supplemented elite warrior bands during major campaigns, drawing upon broader populations to field substantial armies when circumstances required. The levy system enabled the Helvetii to mobilize forces numbering in tens of thousands, as demonstrated during their attempted 58 BC migration when they fielded an army estimated at over 90,000 warriors. Little did they know that this migration would bring them face to face with one of history's greatest military minds and change their fate forever. The late 2nd century BC witnessed the first direct military confrontation between the Helvetii Confederation and the expanding Roman Republic through their participation in the Cimbrian Wars. The catalyst originated far beyond Helvetii territory in the Jutland Peninsula, where the Germanic Cimbri and Teutones tribes faced mounting pressure from climate deterioration and population growth. Archaeological evidence from Danish bog sites reveals declining agricultural yields, while pollen analysis indicates cooling temperatures and increased precipitation reducing available arable land. These environmental pressures, combined with internal tribal conflicts, triggered the largest population movement in recorded Germanic history. The migrating hordes sweeping southward around 113 BC comprised not merely warrior bands, but entire peoples, including women, children, elderly, and livestock transported in massive wagon trains stretching miles across the European countryside. As these Germanic masses moved through Central Europe, they encountered and absorbed various Celtic tribes who either joined the migration voluntarily or were compelled through military defeat. The Tigerini, the northeastern component of the Helvetii Confederation, found themselves directly in this human avalanche's path as it swept through the upper Rhine Valley. Rather than attempting to resist overwhelming numbers, Tigerini leadership made the calculated decision to join the movement, contributing approximately 15,000 warriors along with their families and dependents. The first major encounter between this combined Germanic Celtic force and Roman armies occurred in 113 BC near Noraia, a Celtic oppidum in the eastern Alps. The Roman consul Gnaeus Papirius Carbo had marched north with substantial force to intercept the migrants, confident that traditional Roman military superiority would quickly disperse what he perceived as an undisciplined barbarian rabble. However, the battle that ensued demonstrated the formidable fighting capabilities of the combined tribal army and limitations of conventional Roman tactics against such unconventional opponents. The Roman defeat at Noraia sent shockwaves throughout the Republic. The most devastating Roman defeat occurred in 107 BC at the Battle of Bibracte, where the Tigerini played crucial roles in destroying a consular army led by Lucius Cassius Longinus. The Roman force, comprising 2 legions plus auxiliary troops totaling approximately 20,000 men, had been dispatched to intercept the westward moving tribal column before it could reach the Mediterranean coast. The battle demonstrated tactical sophistication the Tigerini and their allies had developed through years campaigning against various opponents. Rather than launching frontal assaults against prepared Roman positions, tribal commanders implemented complex pincer movements utilizing superior cavalry mobility and psychological impact of coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The destruction of Cassius's army proved so complete that few survivors escaped to carry disaster news back to Roman territory. The consul himself perished in fighting along with most senior officers and the majority of legionary troops. Tribal forces captured Roman eagle standards, vast quantities of weapons and armor, and substantial amounts of gold and silver from the army's war chest. The psychological impact of this victory resonated throughout the tribal confederation, reinforcing beliefs in their military superiority and encouraging further aggressive actions against Roman territories. The crisis precipitated by these military disasters forced fundamental changes in Roman military organization and strategic thinking. Gaius Marius's military reforms addressed fundamental weaknesses tribal victories had exposed in traditional Roman military organization. The citizen militia system that had served Rome effectively in Italian campaigns proved inadequate for extended operations required to counter mobile tribal armies. Marius implemented professional military systems recruiting volunteers from the urban poor and landless citizens, providing them with standardized equipment, extended training, and prospects of land grants upon service completion. These professional legions differed fundamentally from predecessors in both organization and tactical capabilities. The new legionary formations emphasized flexibility and adaptability with smaller tactical units called cohorts that could operate independently while maintaining coordination with larger formations. The reforms fundamentally altered Romano-Celtic interactions by creating Roman forces specifically designed to counter tribal military advantages. The professional legions possessed training, equipment, and organizational structures necessary to neutralize mobility and psychological warfare tactics that had proven so effective against traditional Roman armies. The Helvetii participation in subsequent Gallic campaigns revealed both their military value to Roman forces and their gradual integration into broader Roman strategic objectives. During campaigns against the Belgae in 57 BC, Helvetii cavalry units provided crucial reconnaissance capabilities, enabling Roman forces to identify enemy positions across northern Gaul's difficult terrain. But the greatest test was yet to come. A migration that would pit the entire Helvetii nation against Julius Caesar himself. The political machinations that would ultimately trigger the most significant crisis in Helvetii history began in shadowy aristocratic conspirator councils who envisioned dramatic expansion of Celtic power across Gaul. At the center of these ambitious schemes stood Orgetorix, a nobleman whose name reflected his martial prowess and whose political acumen matched his warrior reputation. Orgetorix's conspiracy emerged from his recognition that the traditional Helvetii Confederation faced mounting pressures threatening its long-term survival within their Alpine homeland. Germanic tribes, particularly the Suebi under their aggressive king Ariovistus, had established permanent settlements west of the Rhine and were exerting increasing pressure on Celtic territories. Orgetorix's analysis of these strategic challenges led him to conclude that passive defense of existing territories offered no viable long-term solution. The Helvetii homeland, while defensible and economically productive, could not support population growth necessary to match Germanic demographic advantages. Furthermore, Alpine geography providing natural defensive barriers also limited opportunities for territorial expansion, providing additional resources and strategic depth. These constraints convinced Orgetorix that only through bold offensive action could the Helvetii secure their future survival and prosperity. The vision emerging from these strategic calculations involved nothing less than complete relocation of the entire Helvetii Confederation to new territories in western Gaul, specifically targeting fertile lands controlled by the Santones along the Saône River Valley. This region offered numerous advantages: extensive agricultural lands capable of supporting large populations, control over crucial trade routes connecting Mediterranean markets with northern European territories, and strategic positions enabling the Helvetii to dominate surrounding Celtic tribes. The audacity of Orgetorix's plan extended beyond mere territorial acquisition to encompass creation of a new Celtic empire that would unite major Gallic tribes under Helvetii leadership. The diplomatic foundation for this ambitious scheme rested upon secret negotiations with two key figures among neighboring tribes, Casticus of the Sequani and Dumnorix of the Aedui. These men represented the younger generation of Celtic aristocrats who chafed under traditional tribal politics constraints and sought opportunities to expand their personal power and influence. The conspiracy uniting these three ambitious nobles involved detailed planning for coordinated action that would simultaneously destabilize existing political arrangements across Gaul while positioning conspirators to seize power within their respective tribes. The decision to proceed with mass migration rather than conventional military campaigns reflected careful analysis of the strategic situation confronting the Helvetii Confederation. Traditional raiding expeditions or territorial conquest through gradual expansion would inevitably provoke Roman intervention, as such activities would threaten established Roman interests in Gaul. Mass migration, by contrast, could be presented as defensive measures necessitated by Germanic pressure, potentially avoiding immediate Roman opposition while accomplishing the same territorial objectives. The logistics of relocating an entire people presented unprecedented organizational challenges requiring months of detailed preparation. Census records maintained by Helvetii administrators indicated total populations approaching 400,000 individuals, including approximately 90,000 potential warriors, along with their families, dependents, and various non-combatant specialists. Moving such numbers across hundreds of miles of potentially hostile territory required careful planning for transportation, supply, security, and communication, testing the limits of Celtic organizational capabilities. The decision to burn all existing settlements, agricultural stores, and infrastructure represented perhaps the most psychologically difficult aspect of migration preparations. This deliberate destruction served multiple purposes. It prevented retreat and ensured total commitment to the migration enterprise. It denied resources to pursuing enemies or competing tribes, and it demonstrated the finality of Helvetii departure to potential allies and opponents. The migration column that departed from Helvetii territory in 58 BC represented one of the largest organized population movements in recorded European history. The Confederation had organized itself into multiple parallel columns that could move simultaneously along different routes, reducing congestion while maintaining mutual support capabilities. Caesar's account provides the most detailed contemporary description, though modern scholars debate his specific figures' accuracy. According to Caesar, census tablets captured after Helvetii defeat recorded total populations of 368,000 individuals, including 263,000 Helvetii proper, 36,000 Tulingi, 14,000 Latobrigi, 23,000 Rauraci, and 32,000 Boii who had joined the migration. Of these numbers, approximately 92,000 were classified as capable of bearing arms. The die was cast. The Helvetii were marching westward, and Julius Caesar was waiting for them. Caesar's political motivations for intervening in the Helvetii migration extended far beyond immediate security concerns he publicly emphasized. As a member of the unofficial First Triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, Caesar required military victories and territorial acquisitions that would enhance his political standing and provide wealth necessary for advancing his career within the competitive Roman political system. The Gallic governorship offered opportunities for both military glory and financial gain, but only if Caesar could identify legitimate pretexts for major military campaigns. The Helvetii migration provided exactly the type of crisis Caesar needed. The geographical constraints channeling the Helvetii migration route through the narrow corridor between Lake Geneva and the Jura Mountains provided Caesar with significant tactical advantage. This bottleneck offered the possibility of blocking the entire migration with relatively modest forces. Caesar immediately recognized that control of this crucial passage point would determine the outcome of any confrontation with the migrating confederation. Caesar's rapid response to the developing crisis demonstrated both his military acumen and his understanding of delay's political implications. Upon receiving confirmed reports of Helvetii movement toward Geneva, he departed Rome immediately with a small escort. The destruction of the bridge across the Rhone at Geneva represented Caesar's first concrete action to contain the Helvetii migration, transforming the river from potential crossing point into significant obstacle, forcing the Confederation to negotiate or seek alternative routes. Roman engineers working under emergency conditions demolished stone supports and wooden superstructure that had facilitated commercial traffic between Roman territory and Alpine regions. The construction of a fortified line extending from Lake Geneva to the Jura Mountains represented perhaps the most ambitious engineering project undertaken during Caesar's early Gallic campaigns. This defensive barrier, stretching approximately 19 miles across the narrow corridor through which the Helvetii would be forced to pass, combined natural obstacles with artificial fortifications, creating an impassable barrier to mass migration. The failure of diplomatic negotiations at Geneva forced the Helvetii Confederation to reconsider their migration strategy, ultimately leading to decisions that would precipitate the most significant military confrontation between Celtic and Roman forces in the 1st century BC. Unable to secure passage through the narrow corridor controlled by Caesar's fortifications, Confederation leadership convened emergency councils that would determine alternative routes to their intended destination in Sequani territory. The alternative route selected by Helvetii leadership required passage through Sequani territories, fundamentally altering the conflict's political dynamics by directly involving one of Gaul's most powerful tribes. The Aedui tribe's formal request for Roman military assistance marked a crucial turning point, providing Caesar with legal justification necessary for major military operations beyond Roman provincial boundaries. Aedui envoys, led by prominent nobles representing the pro-Roman faction, presented detailed accounts of Helvetii raids and territorial violations threatening tribal security. The formal alliance relationship between Rome and the Aedui created legal obligations requiring Roman response to such requests, providing Caesar with the pretext he needed for aggressive military intervention. The concentration of Roman forces near Bibracte reflected Caesar's strategic decision to force decisive confrontation that would resolve the migration crisis through military victory. The Roman tactical deployment at Bibracte demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Celtic warfare methods and terrain features that could influence battle outcomes. Caesar positioned his forces on elevated ground that would force Celtic attacks uphill while providing Roman artillery and missile troops with commanding fields of fire. The 10th and 11th legions formed the primary battle line, with veteran cohorts positioned at crucial points where Celtic assault pressure would be most intense. Roman pilum volleys delivered at optimal range as Celtic forces closed with the main defensive line proved devastatingly effective against Celtic shield walls. The heavy javelins designed specifically to penetrate Celtic shields and disable enemy equipment created chaos within attacking formations. The decisive phase of the battle began when Roman tactical reserves, carefully positioned to exploit opportunities for counterattack, launched coordinated assaults against Celtic forces that had become disorganized during breakthrough attempts. The collapse of Celtic resistance occurred when Confederation forces recognized their assault had failed and began conducting uncoordinated withdrawals, quickly degenerating into general retreat. Roman pursuit operations following the Celtic collapse demonstrated tactical advantages provided by disciplined formations and coordinated command structures. According to Roman sources, Celtic losses exceeded 200,000 killed, including substantial numbers of non-combatants who had accompanied the migration, though modern historians question specific numbers' accuracy given the propaganda purposes the account served. The Helvetii dream of a new homeland was over. Now came the reckoning. The fate of Confederation survivors following the battle reflected both Roman policy objectives and practical considerations regarding defeated populations' management. Caesar's decision to force surviving Helvetii to return to their original territories served multiple strategic purposes. It prevented establishment of hostile Celtic populations in western Gaul, demonstrated Roman power to other potentially rebellious tribes, and avoided administrative challenges associated with integrating large numbers of defeated enemies into Roman provincial systems. The logistics of returning approximately 110,000 surviving Helvetii to their Alpine homeland presented enormous organizational challenges requiring Roman supervision and support. Caesar's strategic reasoning for preventing Germanic occupation of abandoned Helvetii territories reflected sophisticated understanding of regional power balance and long-term security implications of demographic changes. The evacuation of Helvetii lands had created demographic vacuums that Suebi and other Germanic tribes were eager to fill, potentially bringing hostile populations closer to Roman territories while disrupting existing alliance relationships with Celtic tribes. The forced repatriation policy prevented these adverse developments while maintaining buffer populations between Roman territories and aggressive Germanic peoples. The immediate aftermath of Bibracte established frameworks for new political realities that would govern Helvetii existence for the remainder of the pre-imperial period. The return journey to Alpine territories proved almost as traumatic as the original migration, as the defeated Confederation faced enormous challenges of re-establishing communities in lands they had systematically destroyed before departing. The burned settlements, devastated agricultural infrastructure, and depleted resource bases created immediate survival challenges, requiring extensive Roman supervision and material assistance. The tribute arrangements imposed upon defeated Helvetii reflected Roman policy objectives balancing punishment for rebellion with practical considerations regarding the tribe's capacity to generate revenue for Roman purposes. Annual tribute assessments calculated based on pre-migration population figures and estimated agricultural productivity required substantial payments in grain, livestock, manufactured goods, and precious metals flowing to Roman provincial treasuries. These obligations represented approximately 20% of estimated tribal production, substantial but not so excessive as to prevent economic recovery and long-term stability. The hostage system implemented alongside tribute obligations served multiple functions within the new Romano-Helvetii relationship, providing both security guarantees and mechanisms for cultural integration, reducing future rebellion likelihood. Each major Helvetii clan was required to provide hostages from prominent families, typically younger sons or daughters of nobles who would reside in Roman settlements and receive Roman education while serving as guarantees of their family's loyalty. Roman education programs for Helvetii hostages represented systematic efforts to create pro-Roman leadership cadres within Celtic society through cultural assimilation and personal relationship building. The military obligations imposed upon Helvetii as part of their client status required provision of auxiliary troops for Roman campaigns while simultaneously limiting tribal military capabilities that could threaten Roman security. Helvetii military contributions to Roman forces typically involved specialized units utilizing traditional Celtic fighting skills within Roman tactical frameworks, including cavalry squadrons for reconnaissance and pursuit operations, and infantry cohorts trained in mountain warfare techniques. The integration of Helvetii military units into Roman campaign forces demonstrated both practical benefits and inherent tensions associated with client army contributions. The most significant test of Helvetii loyalty to Roman interests occurred during Vercingetorix's Great Rebellion in 52 BC. When the Arvernian chieftain's calls for pan-Gallic resistance created powerful pressures for Celtic tribes to abandon their Roman alliances and join the independence movement. Vercingetorix's propaganda emphasized Celtic cultural unity and shared threats posed by Roman expansion, appealing to tribal pride and traditional hostilities suppressed but not eliminated through client relationships. The decision by significant Helvetii contingents to join Vercingetorix's coalition at Alesia represented dramatic breaks with their client status and demonstrated limitations of Roman efforts to ensure tribal loyalty through hostage systems and tribute obligations. The aftermath of Alesia created severe consequences for those Helvetii who had participated in rebellion, as Caesar implemented punishment policies designed to deter future resistance while maintaining tribal community viability that would continue serving Roman interests. Leaders of Helvetii contingents that had joined Vercingetorix faced execution or enslavement, while their followers experienced property confiscation and reduction to dependent status within their tribal communities. But despite this harsh treatment, the Helvetii would gradually find their place within the Roman world, a world that would transform them in ways they could never have imagined. The economic transformation of Helvetii society under Roman hegemony involved fundamental changes in production systems, trade relationships, and resource allocation, gradually integrating tribal territories into broader Mediterranean commercial networks. Roman merchants operating under client treaties and tribute agreements, protection established permanent trading posts throughout Helvetii territory, facilitating systematic extraction of local resources while also introducing new technologies and consumption patterns. The monetization of Helvetii economic systems represented one of the most significant changes introduced through Roman influence, as traditional barter systems and cattle-based wealth storage gradually gave way to coin-based exchange mechanisms, facilitating integration with Roman commercial networks. Roman coinage found in Helvetii archaeological contexts reveals gradual penetration of monetary exchange systems into previously non-monetized tribal economies. Early Roman coins in the region consist primarily of denarii and aurae, associated with tribute payments and military service compensation, while later periods show evidence of smaller denominations used for local commercial transactions. The introduction of Roman agricultural techniques created significant improvements in crop yields and farming efficiency, supporting population growth, while also increasing resource bases available for tribute obligations. Roman agricultural specialists working with Helvetii farmers introduced improved plowing techniques, crop rotation systems, and selective breeding programs, enhancing Alpine farming systems' productivity. The expansion of viticulture under Roman influence represented particularly significant agricultural innovation, creating new commercial opportunities while also introducing Mediterranean cultural practices into Celtic society. Roman agricultural specialists identified suitable locations for vineyard establishment throughout Helvetii territory, introducing grape varieties and cultivation techniques that could produce wine suitable for both local consumption and export to Roman markets. Roman commercial networks established throughout Helvetii territory facilitated systematic extraction of local resources while also introducing manufactured goods and luxury items, creating new consumption patterns among tribal elites. The cultural adaptation occurring within Helvetii society under Roman hegemony involved complex processes of selective adoption and resistance varying significantly across different social groups and geographic regions. Elite families whose political positions depended upon Roman support generally embraced Roman cultural practices more extensively, while also maintaining elements of traditional Celtic identity, preserving their legitimacy within tribal communities. Common farmers and craftsmen experienced Roman cultural influence primarily through economic relationships and administrative requirements, leading to more gradual and selective cultural changes. Roman architectural influences became visible throughout Helvetii territory as traditional Celtic construction techniques were supplemented with Roman building methods providing enhanced durability and functionality. Roman construction specialists introduced improved masonry techniques, standardized measurement systems, and architectural designs reflecting Roman aesthetic preferences while accommodating local climate conditions and available materials. The persistence of Celtic religious practices under Roman rule reflected both pragmatic tolerance of Roman administrators and deep cultural significance of traditional spiritual beliefs within Helvetii society. Druidical institutions faced particular challenges under Roman administration, as their traditional roles in legal proceedings, education, and political leadership conflicted with Roman administrative systems and cultural policies. Roman authorities gradually assumed responsibility for legal functions previously handled by Druids, while also restricting Druidical educational activities that could preserve anti-Roman political traditions. However, Druids continued to serve important religious functions within their communities and maintained influence over cultural practices Roman administrators found difficult to control directly. Augustus's consolidation of power following his victory at Actium in 31 BC fundamentally transformed Roman policy toward Alpine regions, as the new emperor recognized that permanent pacification of these strategic territories required comprehensive integration rather than mere military occupation. The systematic campaigns launched against Alpine tribes between 25 and 15 BC represented culmination of decades of Roman northward expansion, finally bringing the entire Alpine arc under direct imperial control. The administrative reorganization following military conquest created new territorial divisions, reflecting Roman strategic priorities rather than traditional tribal boundaries. The founding of Aventicum as capital of the newly established Civitas Helvetiorum represented the most visible symbol of Roman commitment to transforming Celtic tribal territories into integrated imperial system components. The city's location on Lake Morat's shores provided access to water transportation networks while also commanding strategic approaches to Jura passes, making it an ideal administrative center for controlling movement between Alpine regions and broader Gallic territories. Roman urban planners designed Aventicum according to classical principles, featuring rectangular grid patterns, central forum complexes, and monumental architecture proclaiming Roman authority while providing practical facilities for governmental administration. The Helvetii had entered a new world, a Roman world that would reshape their identity forever. The construction of Aventicum required enormous investments in both material resources and specialized labor, demonstrating imperial commitment to permanent urban development in previously tribal territories. The city's forum complex, covering over 2 hectares, featured colonnaded porticos surrounding central plazas where official ceremonies and commercial activities could occur simultaneously, creating focal points for both governmental and economic functions. The amphitheater, constructed at Aventicum with seating capacity for approximately 16,000 spectators, provided facilities for gladiatorial games and public spectacles, introducing Roman entertainment culture to previously Celtic populations. Roman architectural innovations at Aventicum included advanced heating systems, sophisticated water supply networks, and decorative programs showcasing imperial artistic traditions while accommodating local climate conditions. The Hippocaust heating systems installed in public buildings and elite residences utilized hot air circulation through hollow walls and floors, providing comfortable interior environments during harsh Alpine winters. These technological innovations, previously unknown in Celtic territories, created living standards attracting local elites while also demonstrating practical benefits of Roman civilization. The grant of Latin rights to Helvetii communities represented crucial steps in legal integration of tribal populations into the Roman imperial system, providing pathways to citizenship while maintaining administrative flexibility regarding local customs and institutions. Latin rights enabled qualified individuals to acquire Roman citizenship through service in local magistracies, creating incentives for political participation while also ensuring municipal leadership positions were filled by individuals with legal stakes in the Roman system. The expansion of full Roman citizenship to increasing numbers of Helvetii individuals occurred through multiple mechanisms including military service, commercial success, and administrative appointment, rewarding loyalty and competence. The legal transformation of tribal institutions into Roman municipal structures required careful adaptation of Celtic political traditions to imperial administrative requirements, while preserving elements of local identity, maintaining community cohesion. Traditional tribal assemblies evolved into municipal councils with formal legal authority over local governance, taxation, and judicial proceedings. Celtic nobles who had previously derived authority from hereditary status and warrior achievement adapted to Roman political systems, emphasizing legal competence, administrative efficiency, and loyalty to imperial institutions. Archaeological evidence from villa sites throughout Helvetii territory reveals dramatic transformation of elite residential architecture as local nobles adopted Roman lifestyle patterns while maintaining elements of traditional Celtic identity. The villa at Orbe Bosqueaz, constructed during the early imperial period, featured classical architectural elements including colonnaded courtyards, decorative mosaics, and hypocaust heating systems demonstrating the owner's Roman cultural sophistication. However, the villa's location and landscape integration reflected Celtic preferences for hilltop positions and visual connections to traditional territorial landmarks. The religious transformation occurring throughout Helvetii territory involved gradual syncretism between Celtic and Roman spiritual traditions, creating hybrid religious systems accommodating both imperial requirements and local cultural needs. Traditional Celtic deities were increasingly identified with Roman counterparts through Interpretatio Romana, enabling continued worship of familiar spiritual figures within Roman religious frameworks. The Celtic god Teutates became associated with Mars, while local water deities were identified with Roman nymphs and river gods, preserving spiritual connections to landscape features while conforming to Roman religious categories. The construction of Roman-style temples throughout Helvetii territory provided architectural frameworks for religious activities combining Roman ritual requirements with Celtic spiritual traditions, creating sacred spaces serving both imperial and local religious needs. The temple complex at Aventicum featured classical architectural elements, including Corinthian columns and triangular pediments, while incorporating Celtic religious symbols and maintaining orientations toward traditional sacred landscape features. The decline of traditional Celtic material culture occurred gradually throughout the imperial period as Roman manufacturing techniques and aesthetic preferences increasingly dominated local production systems. The linguistic changes occurring throughout Helvetii territory during this period involved gradual replacement of Celtic languages with Latin for official purposes. While Celtic languages persisted in domestic and rural contexts for several generations, Latin became essential for legal proceedings, commercial transactions, and administrative communications, creating practical incentives for language acquisition among individuals seeking advancement within Roman institutional systems. The educational systems established in Roman urban centers provided instruction in Latin literacy and Roman cultural traditions, creating pathways for social advancement while also facilitating cultural assimilation among younger generations. The economic integration of Helvetii territory into broader imperial commercial networks created new opportunities for wealth accumulation, while also generating dependencies on Roman markets and supply systems reinforcing political subordination. Local agricultural production increasingly oriented toward Roman urban markets, while craft production adapted to Roman aesthetic preferences and technical standards, enabling access to imperial commercial networks. The road construction projects undertaken throughout Helvetii territory during the early imperial period created transportation infrastructure facilitating both military control and commercial development, while also demonstrating Roman engineering capabilities to local populations. The transformation was complete. The Helvetii were no longer a Celtic tribe. They were Romans. But not everyone accepted this new identity willingly. The transformation of religious practices throughout Helvetii territory during the High Imperial period reveals sophisticated mechanisms through which Roman administrative systems accommodated local spiritual traditions, while gradually reshaping them to serve imperial ideological purposes. Archaeological excavations at the sanctuary of Tun al-Mendingen have uncovered complex sequences of architectural modifications, demonstrating how Celtic sacred sites evolved into Roman-style temple complexes without abandoning their fundamental spiritual significance for local populations. The original Celtic nemeton, marked by circular arrangements of oak posts surrounding natural springs, was gradually enclosed within stone walls and fitted with classical architectural elements. The inscriptional evidence from this site provides remarkable documentation of religious syncretism in action, as votive dedications span nearly 3 centuries and demonstrate gradual fusion of Celtic and Roman divine concepts. Early inscriptions dating to the Flavian period invoke Celtic deities using traditional names, but employ Latin formulaic language and Roman dedicatory practices. Later inscriptions from the same site reveal increasing complexity in divine identifications, as Celtic deities acquired Roman epithets and attributes, expanding their spiritual functions while maintaining connections to traditional Celtic religious concepts. The persistence of Celtic religious festivals within Roman institutional frameworks demonstrates pragmatic flexibility characterizing imperial religious policy in provincial territories. The festival of Lugnasad, celebrating harvest seasons and honoring the Celtic god Lugh, continued throughout the imperial period, but gradually acquired Roman elements including gladiatorial games, theatrical performances, and official ceremonies honoring the imperial cult. The integration of Celtic druids into Roman religious hierarchies occurred through complex negotiations, preserving druidical religious authority while eliminating their political and judicial functions conflicting with Roman administrative systems. The economic prosperity characterizing Helvetii territory during the Pax Romana created material foundations for cultural synthesis defining this period, as increased wealth enabled local populations to participate in Roman consumer culture while also supporting traditional Celtic artistic production. Archaeological evidence from urban sites throughout the region reveals dramatic increases in imported goods, including fine ceramics from Gallic workshops, wine from Mediterranean vineyards, and luxury items such as glass vessels and bronze mirrors, reflecting Roman aesthetic preferences. The villa economy developing throughout rural Helvetii territory during this period represented fundamental transformation of agricultural production systems integrating Roman estate management techniques with traditional Celtic farming practices. The villa at Vallon featured complexes of residential, agricultural, and industrial buildings supporting diversified economic activities including grain production, livestock breeding, winemaking, and craft manufacturing. The agricultural intensification evident at villa sites throughout territory reflects application of Roman farming techniques to Alpine environmental conditions, creating production systems supporting both local consumption and commercial export to urban markets. The specialization in horse breeding developing on many villa estates reflected both Roman military requirements and natural advantages Alpine pastures provided for raising high-quality cavalry mounts. The villa at Lenzburg maintained extensive pasture systems and breeding facilities, producing horses for Roman auxiliary cavalry units stationed along the Rhine frontier. The development of viticulture throughout suitable areas of Helvetii territory created new agricultural specializations requiring substantial initial investments, but ultimately generating significant profits for successful estate owners. The craft specialization emerging in urban centers throughout Helvetii territory combined Roman manufacturing techniques with traditional Celtic artistic traditions, creating distinctive regional products serving both local markets and export demand throughout the empire. The workshops at Aventicum produced bronze vessels, jewelry, and decorative objects featuring Celtic artistic motifs executed using Roman technical methods. The pottery production centers developing throughout territory manufactured both utilitarian vessels for local consumption and fine ceramics, competing successfully in regional markets dominated by established Gallic workshops. The social mobility characterizing Helvetii society during this period enabled individuals from traditional Celtic backgrounds to achieve prominence within Roman institutional systems while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. The career of Gaius Julius Camillus, documented through inscriptional evidence from Aventicum, illustrates how ambitious individuals could advance through Roman administrative hierarchies while preserving elements of Celtic identity. The adaptation strategies employed by Helvetii elites reveal sophisticated understanding of Roman political systems and cultural expectations, as successful individuals learn to navigate imperial institutions while maintaining local influence and traditional legitimacy. The arrival of Christianity in Helvetii territory during the 3rd century occurred through multiple channels including military service, commercial contacts, and missionary activities, gradually establishing Christian communities within existing Roman urban centers. The earliest Christian archaeological evidence consists of small personal objects including rings bearing Christian symbols and pottery vessels marked with Chi-Rho monograms indicating individual conversions rather than organized community activities. But as Christianity spread, it would encounter resistance from those still clinging to the old gods, and the struggle between old and new would reshape Helvetii identity once more. The development of organized Christian communities during the 4th century required careful negotiation with existing religious institutions and cultural practices that had deep roots in both Roman and Celtic traditions. The Christian community at Aventicum established meeting places in private houses before constructing purpose-built churches incorporating architectural elements from both Roman and Celtic religious traditions. The Church of St. Symphorian, constructed during the late 4th century, featured basilica plans derived from Roman civic architecture while incorporating decorative elements reflecting local artistic traditions. The interaction between Christianity and existing pagan traditions created syncretistic religious practices, enabling converts to maintain connections to traditional spiritual beliefs while accepting Christian theological concepts. Celtic sacred sites continued to attract devotional activities, but Christian symbols and prayers gradually replaced traditional Celtic religious practices. The resistance to Christian conversion, persisting in rural areas throughout the 4th and 5th centuries, reflected both the strength of traditional religious beliefs and the limited reach of Christian missionary activities in remote Alpine regions. The crisis of the 3rd century struck Helvetii territory with devastating force, as the collapse of imperial authority created conditions of chronic instability, fundamentally altering the political and economic foundations of Romano-Celtic society. The military anarchy characterizing this period, with over 50 claimants to imperial power between 235 and 284 AD, created unprecedented challenges for provincial populations caught between competing armies, barbarian raiders, and economic collapse. Archaeological evidence from villa sites throughout Helvetii territory reveals systematic abandonment during the mid-3rd century, as estate owners fled to fortified urban centers or simply disappeared from the historical record entirely. The monetary crisis accompanying political instability created severe disruptions in commercial networks that had sustained Romano-Celtic prosperity for over 2 centuries. The debasement of Roman silver coinage, which fell from 98% purity under Marcus Aurelius to less than 5% under Gallienus, destroyed confidence in imperial currency and forced local populations to revert to barter systems and alternative forms of value storage. The barbarian invasions sweeping across the Rhine frontier, beginning in the 230s, brought Germanic war bands directly into Helvetii territory for the first time since the Cimbrian Wars over 3 centuries earlier. The Alemanni, a confederation of Germanic tribes that had coalesced along the Upper Rhine during the early 3rd century, launched systematic raids across the frontier, targeting wealthy villa estates and urban centers of Roman Gaul. Archaeological evidence from Aventicum reveals hasty construction of defensive walls around the city center during this period, using stone blocks salvaged from public buildings and private residences demolished to provide building materials for fortifications. The Alemannic raids of 260 AD penetrated deep into Helvetii territory, reaching as far south as Alpine passes and creating refugee movements overwhelming urban defensive capabilities. The fortification of settlements throughout Helvetii territory during this period created new urban landscapes, characterized by contracted defensive perimeters and militarized architecture reflecting breakdown of imperial security systems. Aventicum's population retreated behind hastily constructed walls, enclosing less than half the original urban area, abandoning peripheral districts that could not be defended effectively. The amphitheater, which had served as a symbol of Roman cultural achievement for over 2 centuries, was converted into a fortress with defensive walls blocking its entrances and military equipment stored in its underground chambers. The gradual Alemannic settlement of former Helvetii lands began during the 4th century, as Germanic pressure on the Rhine frontier created permanent demographic changes Roman authorities proved unable to reverse. Unlike earlier raids focusing on plunder and destruction, these later movements involved entire tribal groups seeking permanent settlement in territories offering superior agricultural opportunities and strategic advantages. The Alemanni established fortified settlements in river valleys and fertile plains that had previously supported Roman villa estates, creating new political entities operating independently of imperial authority. Archaeological evidence from Alemannic settlement sites reveals sophisticated adaptation strategies combining Germanic cultural traditions with Roman technological innovations and Celtic agricultural practices. The settlement at Kaiseraugst, established around 350 AD, featured Germanic-style timber halls constructed using Roman masonry techniques, while agricultural areas utilized Roman field systems and irrigation networks abandoned by previous inhabitants. The linguistic transformation accompanying Alemannic settlement created complex multilingual communities where Germanic dialects gradually became dominant, while Latin and Celtic languages persisted in specific social and functional contexts. The survival of Helvetii identity during this period of dramatic political and demographic change occurred through various mechanisms, preserving cultural memory while adapting to new political realities. Place names throughout the territory retained Celtic origins, commemorating tribal history and territorial boundaries, creating geographical references, maintaining connections to pre-Germanic political organization. The name Helvetia itself persisted as a regional designation encompassing territories controlled by various Alemannic groups, while specific locations like Aventicum retained their Roman names alongside Germanic alternatives reflecting new political control. The incorporation of Helvetii historical narratives into medieval Swiss chronicles occurred through complex processes of cultural transmission, combining surviving oral traditions with learned historical writing based on classical sources. Monastic scriptoriums throughout the Alpine region preserved copies of Caesar's commentaries and other classical texts, documenting Celtic history while also recording local traditions providing alternative perspectives on ancient events. Modern archaeological discoveries have revolutionized understanding of Helvetii culture through systematic excavations at Oppida sites, revealing sophisticated urban planning and technological capabilities previously unknown from classical sources. The legacy of the Helvetii extends far beyond their immediate historical period, as their political institutions, cultural practices, and territorial concepts continued to influence European political development throughout the medieval and early modern periods. The Confederate principles characterizing ancient Celtic political organization provided ideological foundations for the Swiss Confederation emerging during the late medieval period, while territorial boundaries established during the Roman period continued to influence administrative divisions and cultural identities into the modern era. The name Helvetia itself became a symbol of Swiss independence and cultural distinctiveness, drawing explicit connections between ancient Celtic resistance to foreign domination and modern Swiss political values. The Helvetii were gone, but their spirit lived on in the mountains and valleys they once called home, inspiring future generations to value freedom, confederation, and independence above all else.